All right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dieter Schuller. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at RadiantLogic. And I wanted to introduce Paul Munsen. Paul is the Global Head of Identity and Access Management at McDonald's. And what we're going to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so, 25 with questions, is two things. One, scaling identity, and then two, what we've seen in the market is these federation layers, and ADFS is a great example, are really good at securely passing information about the user to the application when they have all the information. And so if you look at ADFS as an example, right, it looks for that information inside of Active Directory. If you've got it there, life is good. If you don't, life becomes a challenge. And then you look at organizations right now that are struggling with, you know, I've got lots of different places that have a 360 view of my users. I have an identity warehouse. I have a master data management initiative. I've deployed something like SailPoint, where I've gone through and started to rationalize all the entitlements. None of that is in AD. And when you start to look at business models where you have potentially corporate employees and then store employees or franchisees or other people that in certain cases need to be treated like employees, you start to see where the challenges start to show up. So I'd like to introduce Paul and have him talk about what they're doing with identity virtualization at McDonald's and how they're scaling and meeting the needs of the business.
Thanks, Dieter. It's great to be here and get this opportunity to talk about our use of RadiantLogic. So first, before I begin, just to keep our lawyers happy, this presentation contains my opinions, my information. This is not an official McDonald's communication. But let me give you a little background. If you haven't heard of McDonald's, we're a hamburger company. Hey, good. I'm glad most of you have heard of it. We sell a lot of hamburgers. There's, on any given day, there's about 70 million people that'll come into a McDonald's to order a meal or a drink. We're in 117 different countries, and there's over 36,000 restaurants around the world. While McDonald's has a very centralized, consistent brand message, it's really a very distributed company behind the scenes. About 80% of our restaurants are franchised organizations. That means they're owned by independent owner-operators, and they're really independent companies. So since this is an identity conference, though, you're interested in people. In our extended enterprise, we have about 2 million people, and that consists of our corporate employees, franchisees, restaurant managers, and then the crew members that actually do the work in the restaurants. So it makes for a rather large environment. As far as our IT systems go, we have a few challenges. A while back, we undertook an effort to count our HR systems, given our distributed nature in all these different countries. We counted up to about 200 and then gave up. So, I've heard people complain when they have 2 HR systems they need to work with and integrate with. So, it's a challenging environment with our distributed setup. We also have a very highly outsourced infrastructure. We use a lot of service providers. We have a few large outsourcing contracts. We have a lot of best-of-breed outsourcing that we use. My team, to manage 2 million identities, we have 5 full-time employees, then everything else is outsourced. We also use a lot of SaaS providers, so we're doing a lot with the cloud. Some of that's the big providers. We do a lot with Amazon. We do a lot with Azure. But we also see that our business does a lot with smaller niche players. So you need a system to manage leases for 36,000 restaurants. Well, guess what? There's tools out there that do that now. You don't always have to build it. Then that's great until you have to integrate with all these various systems. So even with all these challenges, I think we've done a pretty good job building a consistent identity management platform. At the foundation, we do use Active Directory. We have a global Active Directory that's set up with a number of consistent domains. There's still a few outliers. Nothing ever completely gets done with 117 different countries, but the vast majority of our user infrastructure is in that global Active Directory. On top of that, we have an identity management tool. We're using Microsoft Forefront Identity Manager to consistently manage attributes, make sure our rules are in place. But beyond that, we have a master data management initiative where we're taking data from all these various sources, or some of these sources, we never seem to get all of it, bring it into a master data management system where we can keep data. That goes a lot far beyond identity, but we do keep identity data in there as well. So we have kind of this consistent, the other side of our identity is our crew access. So 1.5 million of our identities are actually crew members in the restaurants. Our turnover rate's about 100%, so that group of IDs is turning over pretty rapidly. We use, I won't get into a lot of details on it, we actually use social authentication for that because password reset costs on 1.5 million people who turn over every year get pretty expensive. So the social accounts allow us to do that. But that's kept separate from Active Directory, which adds a little bit of complexity, but it's worth it to us based on some of the cost savings we can get with that. So our business is just like every one of yours, I'm sure, where we've been asked to accelerate. We can't take months to integrate new applications, get new SaaS applications up and running. There's just not time to do that anymore. And given our business, some of the changes and everything else, we're currently seeing 2 or 3 new integration requests that come in every week. So we have this pretty full pipeline of new things coming in, applications that need single sign-on. They also need identity, authorization data out of all these other systems. At the same time, we want to be secure with this. We have to limit what data goes to these SaaS providers. We don't want to send this data to, we can't take all of our Active Directory data, all our master data management data, and send it to every niche provider that we have. That's not acceptable. Where possible, we like to use SAML claims. We really like to avoid batch file transfers if we can. So we have these various challenges in integrating these identity, these systems with our identity platform. As we look at options, we know we have a lot of good stuff in our master data system, or we can pull data in there to make it available via claims. The problem is that's a SQL database that's optimized for bringing in batches of data, normalizing things, stuff like that. It's not appropriate. We can't connect our ADFS, which is what we use. We use Microsoft ADFS for single sign-on. We can't connect to that database. It couldn't handle the load. There's too much variability in logins. If somebody's doing a big project and they have a lot of people coming in at once. Active Directory is a great place to store data for ADFS. I mean, the two obviously work well together since they're from Microsoft, but we don't want to put all of our data into Active Directory either. That's, there's some data that's just too private, it doesn't belong there. We could set up another relational database, that's a possibility, but then, there's performance and availability issues. So the solution that we've come up with to help us along with this is really to use Radiant's federated identity service. And it works out well for us. In the context of our environment, this is kind of what it looks like. So we have all these various data sources. We have our crew access management, we have Active Directory, our master data, and then there's always other sources as well, different relational databases or other things where we might have data. We can take all that data, bring it into the federated identity service within Radiant Logic, and that gives us a lot of benefits. One, we can consolidate data from these different sources and normalize it under one, identity record. Our environment's we're not doing anything too crazy there, but it definitely helps. Where we get a lot of benefit is the high availability and load balancing. So we're able to put Radiant Logic servers in all of our global data centers and have it close to the ADFS servers that are doing authentication. And since we cache all of the data from these other systems, we can take a system like our master data management that might be a single database It's not highly available, and now all of a sudden that data is highly available and ready to go. So if they bring that system down for maintenance, we have a cache for it. And the data might be a few minutes out of date, but for identity data, that's not typically a problem. We also find that the performance with the Radiant Logic tool is really good. So when we're trying to get somebody to log in, speed is important, and making the LDAP queries are very fast. We're able to get that in quickly. If we were to connect directly to all these other sources, we'd have a lot of variability in performance, because you may have a system that's slow on a given day, somebody goes to log in, and then all of a sudden we're trying to pull one claim value, and it takes an extra 30 seconds, and it looks like the authentication system's broken because of some back-end system. So we have a lot more predictability with having all the data in the Radiant Logic directory. Then on the security side, we're able to do more with creating views that are specific to applications. If we have Active Directory, everybody sees everything more or less. I mean, there's stuff you can do with ACLs and permissions, but with Radiant Logic, we're able to build very specific views for our various applications. That could be for ADFS. We can set up a view for applications that are tied in there to get the claims they need. For applications that may need data outside of that, we can set up specific views, have the specific attributes, and they don't need to understand all the complexities of our Active Directory domain structure. That simplifies things. So that kind of shows how it helps us on the identity side integrate these applications. On the application side, we see a lot of benefits as well. In the past, if you had an application that was used by our corporate users and by crew members and needed additional rich data, you had a lot of work to do. So you'd have to connect to Active Directory. You'd have to get all that set up. You'd have to connect to the master data management. You'd have to get crew data, and then you'd have to pull all that together within your application and make all of that useful. With Radiant Logic, we're able to do all that connection. We're able to pull out the data together and provide one consistent view of the data to our applications. So our application teams are really happy with the way we can do that. We've developed a lot of patterns around that. We do a lot with authorization, where we have standardized authorization processes where we pull data from these various systems, present it to the application. The application knows exactly what a user is supposed to be able to do without having to do all that gymnastics within the application. To give you a more concrete example, I pulled up one of many of our integrations, and it was DocuSign. When we first went to set up DocuSign, we came up with this process, and it looked like it was going to be a little bit painful. We knew we needed Active Directory data. We knew that DocuSign needed to have some pick lists, where they needed lists of people that were in certain groups. So we couldn't just use claims for this, unfortunately, but it's the nature of the application. So we came up with this process. We could pull data, we'd manage groups in Active Directory, then we'd do some sort of data extract from Active Directory, package all that up into a file, do a data transfer, then DocuSign would have to write code, we'd have to pay them some money, they'd be able to pull that data and bring it into their system and make it available. Best case, we'd probably bring that data in once a week, maybe daily, so it'd never quite be up to date. But instead, what we wound up doing is we wound up using Radiant Logic. So instead of going through all that process, we put the data, we created a view that was very specific to DocuSign. So they can't see our crew data, they can't see other stuff, they just see exactly what we need them to see. We made it available in an LDAP view using LDAP over SSL. Made that available to DocuSign over the internet. I think we had a VPN connection that ran over, but they just connected to the LDAP, so it was just an LDAP server for them. So a very clean solution, single sign-on still through ADFS, and they have up-to-date data, and we're not dealing with files. We don't have files floating around the internet with our data in it, and it's been a clean, reliable solution for us. Some of the other solutions we've had, we're currently doing a lot of work with tying applications that are using AD authentication within the application, not using SAML. We have this great Active Directory. We have hundreds of servers around the world, and our Active Directory is extremely reliable. So what do all our developers do? They pick one Active Directory server, one IP address, and they connect to it. You know, and that's the end of the world when we go to upgrade that server and we bring down that Active Directory server and their application crashes. Active Directory is terrible. Why is it not running? And you know, so you know, instead of trying to explain to them how to connect to Active Directory or how to connect to multiple servers and all that, we can provide a single load balanced Radiant Logic view of Active Directory. They can connect to that, do pass-through authentication. It also gives us a lot more control. You know, we have these applications that pop up. We don't know about them. When we run them through Radiant Logic, then we can have a little bit better handle on who's authenticating, what applications are out there that are doing AD authentication. If somebody's not using that, well, then that's at their own risk. We can provide SLAs through this solution, and it's worked well for us. So just to summarize, you know, security for us is critical. We have to protect the brand, but just as important as that is the ability to deliver these secure solutions quickly and effectively. And we found that, you know, Radiant Logic provides us a nice tool to really help us in some of these use cases to, you know, be able to deliver things much faster and simpler and help our application teams along. So thanks for your time. If you have any questions, I can try and answer those now for you. Yeah, Dieter.
Well, could you talk maybe just for a couple minutes on how you guys are using groups? And do you guys have a need, for example, to take non-corporate employees and put them into the same group as corporate employees?
So, you know, we do a lot with Active Directory groups. We do have a role-based access control. We're using SailPoint for a lot of that on the corporate side, and for a lot of our uses, we kind of default to putting data into AD groups and letting applications read out of those AD groups. For some of the crew type applications, we really don't use groups in that same way, but there's a lot of attribute data that we need to have. So typically, you know, if you're a crew member and you work for a given owner-operator, you probably have one primary restaurant that you're working in, so you want to see data for that restaurant. You may work on occasion in other restaurants that within that same franchised organization. So we need to understand how all that works, and operators buy and sell restaurants constantly, so that data is constantly churning, and being able to provide that, you know, ultimately as either LDAP attributes or claims, you know, to get people to that specific data that they need to see, and you know, dealing with it at that attribute level is a big piece for us. Anything else? No? All right. Well, thanks for your time.